Hey girls, Tiffany Dawn here, and today we're going to talk about how to share your testimony. One of you girls actually wrote in this question a few days ago, and you were about to share your testimony for the first time, I think, that night, which is so cool. And so it got me thinking, you know, I bet this is a question that a lot of girls have. I know I did. So I just want to share some of my own thoughts and experiences on this. I have 6 tips for you that are things that have just helped me personally in figuring out how to share a testimony. And really, like, testimony in my mind is just a fancy word for like your story. The story God has given you of how he has been at work in your life, what you've learned about God and yourself, and how your life has changed because of it. And so it's all about like giving God glory for what he's done, encouraging other people around you, and showing a small piece of who God is to the people around you. Before we get started though, let me just share 2 verses with you. When I think of a testimony, here's what I think of. 1 John 1 verse 1, that which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked at, and our hands have touched, this we proclaim. So I think a testimony is all about what you have seen God do in your life, what you personally have experienced. You're sharing that story. And then the other verse I think of is Revelation 12 verse 10 through 11, which says, "For the accuser of our brothers and sisters who accuses them before our God day and night has been hurled down. They have triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony." So I think that's cool that in a sense we can triumph over our accuser who's like, you don't really know God, you're not really a Christian, or accusing us of all these different things. We can have that triumph by the word of our testimony too. Like, our testimonies can be a reminder to us and to others that God is our God, and that our past sins and mistakes and struggles do not define us, and that he has rescued us, and that we really are his, no matter what we've been through. So I remember one of the first times I shared my testimony, I was asked to share on a missions trip when I was 15. And I remember just thinking, like, what testimony? Like, I was homeschooled, my dad was a kids pastor, like, I don't know what to share. Should I go out and do drugs tonight so I have something to share tomorrow? And I thought that a testimony had to be about something terrible that had happened and how you overcame it. And that's not necessarily true. Really, it's just like a theme that kind of describes your life and brings glory to God and shows how he has been at work in your life. And so that could be through like something terrible that happened, a really hard time, a really sad time when you walked away from God, or it could just be a time when you like learned more about who God is, or how much he loves you, or when it like your faith became real to you and became your own. It could be anything. And as you go throughout life, I think your testimony changes, because as God continues working in our lives, and as we continue going through stuff in our lives, our testimony will continue to change and grow and morph. And so you can't really in like a very short amount of time go through your entire life step by step and like, this happened this day, this happened this day. So you have to find like moments to highlight that can make this overarching arc of your narrative. So tip number 1 is kind of look for that narrative. Like, what theme do you want to pinpoint? What is one of the big themes of your life? So for me, one of the things that I often talk about is my struggle with feeling like I had to be good enough to be loved. And so going from like growing up, trying to be perfect with my grades and everything, then getting to college, being obsessed with what I looked like, with having a boyfriend, never feeling like I was good enough to be worthy of love. And then realizing in my 20s through a series of different events that God loved me just as I was, not because I'd earned it, not because I was good enough, but just because he chose to love me, and just the pressure that that took off of me to know that I could live in his love. And so that's kind of one of the big themes of my life thus far. Step 2, I chose a few stories to illustrate that theme. So I kind of chose like before, during, and after stories. So like, here's what it was like at the beginning when I was struggling with this not being good enough. Or here's what I was like before that moment when I realized who God was, or here's what happened before that really hard time, here's what my life was like. And then the during part, here's what I was like when I was really struggling with this, when I just never felt like I was good enough. Here's a story to illustrate that. And so I often choose like 1 or 2 super short stories that just kind of show like, here's what it was like at the worst of it. And then what God did. But I'll think back over my life and be like, okay, I think like this story kind of illustrates the what God did part of it. And then I should tell a little bit about what my life became like afterwards. And so testimonies, you know, are typically when you share them like short and sweet, which is kind of odd because our testimonies could take days to share. But if you are supposed to share yours in like a 5-minute, 10-minute segment, then just kind of, you might want to practice ahead of time to be able to really tell the story, get the key parts in, but tell it concisely, quickly, efficiently. That way you can kind of like hit the main points and move on without leaving in a whole bunch of like extra details, because that'll like make it take longer. But if you're not worried about a time frame, then who cares? So tip number 3 is focus in your testimony on what God has done and how he changed your life. So the purpose of a testimony is to like bring glory to God and encourage other people and show people like part of who God is. So when you're telling your stories, kind of focus on that. I think it's easy to spend like the whole testimony focusing on the struggle. And it is important to really give people a sense of the struggle you're in, because people really connect with that. But also like make sure you really do focus on what God did and what you learned about him, so that that's a way of like giving him glory in your story. And then tip number 4 is you don't have to like focus too much on the nitty-gritty details of any like sin or struggle that you went through. I think it can be tempting to like tell every detail just so people get how like hard that time was, but that's not really necessary. People don't, especially people who aren't close to you, don't need to know every detail. As part of like having healthy boundaries as a person, realizing that not everyone needs to know everything. And so what I kind of do is share like the generalities of what I was struggling with and some specific stories, but I don't tell like every little detail. Like when I talk about my eating disorder, I don't share what I weighed. I don't share what size my pants were. I don't share what exactly I ate every day. I just don't think that those things are helpful. They can lead more to comparison, like, oh, her eating disorder was worse than mine, or my eating disorder is worse than hers, or whatever. And I don't think it's helpful. I don't think it adds to the story, and it kind of puts too much emphasis on the nitty-gritty details that not everyone needs to know. So kind of think about like what you do want to share, what you don't want to share, and make sure that you do have those healthy boundaries. Boundaries are good to have. There's nothing wrong with saying not everyone needs to know this part of my life. That's okay. Which reminds me of tip number 5 is you don't have to share things you're currently working through. You can if you want to, but again, figure out what healthy boundaries look like for you. So for me personally, I don't usually share things that I'm currently struggling with unless if it's something that God has been bringing some resolution to, some healing to, that I feel ready to share, or if it's a past struggle, I'm fine sharing that with anyone. But my current deep struggles, I don't get into detail with, don't really talk a whole lot about with, except with my closest friends and family and counselor, because to me that's a healthy boundary. I don't want to have a whole bunch of voices speaking into this struggle and telling me all these different things when I'm trying to work through it. I just want to keep that more private. And I think that that's healthy and that's okay, as long as you have some people that you trust, that you're being honest with. So you don't have to share everything. Maybe your testimony is what you've already been through as opposed to what you're currently going through. Unless if it's on your heart to really talk about what you're currently going through, which is fine. And then tip number 6 is just trust that God is going to do what he wants to do with this. That is the coolest thing about sharing our story, is that all we're responsible to do is share the story, and God does all the rest. And that's something that God started showing me a lot when I was on like my speaking tours. I would get so nervous and feel like I gotta like speak the right way, I gotta like say the right thing, that way people get it and like they experience God's love. And I felt like God just showed me like, Tiff, you're not the one who's doing all of that. All you're responsible to do is share the story I have given you to share, and that's it. Everything else I'm taking care of. And that just took so much pressure off, just to know like, in all my mistakes, all the times I said the wrong thing, or all the times I felt like I didn't explain things well or didn't connect well with people, God was at work. And I know after I'd speak at events, people will come up and say, God really spoke this to me. And I was thinking like, where did you get that from? I didn't really even talk about that in my story. But that's just God at work in people's hearts. It's like, I just share my story and he does these crazy things that I just could never do. So just trust him that as you share your story, he'll use that. So girls, I hope that this can encourage you. As always, share your thoughts below. What helps you with sharing a testimony? And if you have just shared your testimony for the first time or are going to, let us know in the comments, because we'd love to like celebrate with you. So love you girls, and I'll see you Friday. Bye.